before I even get into what tension and resolution actually is, you need to know why it's important and why you need to use it with pretty much everything in music going forward. Explaining it won't really help too much though. The main thing that we need to do is listen to some examples. So let's listen to Beethoven and see if you can figure it out for yourself. No? Okay, well let's try Hotel California. There's a part in this guitar solo at the end that might be a little bit easier to hear. No? Maybe Lady Gaga? So if you're hearing it, great. That means that you can identify one of the central foundations of music, songwriting, all that good stuff, shredding, everything. If you can't, don't worry. I'm going to explain all of this to you. And even if you can hear it, you're still going to know what it actually means and what it means as a guitar player and a musician. So going back to those examples of why we actually need tension and resolution, pretty much comes down to the foundation of music and how diatonic chords and how notes work alongside with one another. If you don't have any sort of tension in your chord progressions or in your solos or in your riffs, you're just going to sound pretty flatline, okay? Check out something if I played it like this. Not bad, right? But it would be a little bit better if we maybe added a little bit more spice in there like this. Okay, so tension comes from specific chords in scales, right? So you need a little bit of music theory to understand some of these basic concepts. So we have our notes that can be turned into chords or triads, and those chords can be used in a specific order to create chord progressions. Okay, this is going to have to do with lead playing and riff playing a little bit later, but you need to understand these chords first. So specific chords create tension and other chords create a sort of resolution. Okay, people talk about this all the time of music being a sort of a conversation. With the chord progression that I played earlier, it probably sounded pretty flat to you, right? It might have been okay, but the second one that I played, hopefully it sounded a little bit better and a little bit more diverse, right? Because when I played that last chord, you wanted to hear it go back to, and that's exactly what tension and resolution is, and I'm going to show you exactly how to use it with things like chords, riffs, and solos. So with the music theory, the essential thing is this: the 5 chord and the diminished chord, which if you're in a major key, it's a 7. If you're in a minor key, it's the 2. Those are going to be your main tension chords. Sometimes the 7 can be used, and actually there are other chords that you can use tension for. But for right now, as a beginner, this is where you want to really hone in on. With those examples, we had Beethoven's Fere-Elise, which was a 5-to-1 cadence at the end of the phrase, okay? Most people know Fere-Elise, right? But the reason why it's so iconic and good is because Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, they're all cadence masters. They all knew that you need to have that sort of up and down level of emotion in their melodies and their motifs to make things sound really, really good. And the chord progression is relatively simple. And the same thing goes for the Hotel California thing, except in the solo we had a diminished arpeggio that wound up wanting to resolve back into the tonic. The Lady Gaga one is a simple 5-to-1 cadence. Okay, so cadence marks the end of the phrase. To make a cadence sound really, really good, especially as a beginner, you want to use that tension and resolution, that 5-to-1. You always want to resolve back to that 1, so that way there's a sense of completion before you move on to the next chord progression or before you move on to the next phrase or whatever the heck you're trying to do. Whenever you use that 5 chord, make sure it's a major chord or a dominant chord. If you wound up using a minor 5 chord, yes, it will still have some tension, but to make it a really big and juicy spice, you're going to want to make it a major chord. Pause for a second. If some of this stuff is kind of blowing over your head and it's not really making a lot of sense so far, keep watching for the rest of the video. And also, if you want more of a direct work with me, you can click on the link below. It has my website and it has things like one-on-ones, it has my group masterclass, it has my music theory course, all that stuff. If you care about it and you want that extra help, go ahead and click on that, but let's keep kind of going through this whole video here. Damn near every song uses this sort of tension and resolution, okay? And as we're talking about, the chords that are involved is the 1 chord, which is where you're going to end up resolving to, the 5 chord, which is going to be your first tension chord, and then the diminished chord, which can be used on the 2 or the 7, depending if you're in a minor or a major key, okay? So you do need to understand some level of diatonic chords before we move forward onto the fretboard, which is the next thing that we're going to do, because we're going to go into things like chords and we're going to go into things like riffs and guitar solos. So let's start taking a look at some examples here. So all you need to do is play a scale. Okay, let's take a major scale like G major and stop at the 5th note, which is right there on the 5th fret. Make a major chord off of that, and there's your 5 chord. Yes, you can do them with power chords, but for practical purposes, let's just stick with major chords for now. So you'd play your 1 chord, then your 5 chord, and resolve it. Do you hear that kind of tension? Let's take a minor version of that. So let's do the same chord progression, but in minor. It's the same effect, it's the same exact concept, except you're going to be using the harmonic minor scale. Okay, so if you don't really understand how those things correlate with each other, for now, just think of it like the 5 chord, we're turning it into a major chord. So that's basically how you use it with chord progressions at a very broad level. Yes, you're going to want to put in other chords in between, right? Like maybe a 1, 4, 5. Maybe a 1, 6. 5. You can do all that stuff, okay? It's entirely up to you of what you want to do, right? But the whole ordeal is you need that tension at the end of the chord progression before you resolve back to the beginning of the chord progression. That's why I'm always saving that 5 chord for the end. You want to save that juice that you have of that 5 chord before the chord progression restarts. Okay, you can hear this in songs time and time again. The same thing would be for a diminished chord. Okay, so if you know diminished chord stuff, you can use that as well. So if we were in the key of G major, the diminished chord would be F sharp diminished, okay? Because it's built on the 7, so. Like that, okay? These are just very simple examples. You can do it with minor too, since the A would be diminished. Okay? And make chord progressions out of them the same exact way. Like that. Now a little extra note here, if you want to make the 5 chord a dominant 7 chord, by all means do that. I love using that all the time. So instead of just doing a major chord, make it a 7 chord. Gives it that nice extra spice, right? Okay, so how do we use this with riffs? Well, in all honesty, the concept is kind of the same, except you're mostly going to be outlining the notes rather than the chords. Okay, so if you're playing a riff with individual notes, that's what you kind of want to think about. Okay, so if I made up a riff in the key of, let's say, D minor, I'm a full step down, by the way. Okay, so maybe I'll do something like this. Okay, do you hear this last note here? That's the 5 right there. You want to hear that resolution back to the 1. So that's just an example of something you can do. You can even just listen to things like Crazy Train. That's a good example of using the 7 because we're in F sharp minor. Okay, and then the 7 is E. The next thing that we need to talk about is how do you do them with leads for beginners when you're just starting out, okay? So the first thing that you really need to do is know how to play arpeggios across the fretboard if you really want to maximize this. So like your 1, and then your 5, okay? Do it in a different position, right? All these positions, right, are going to be really, really useful for you. But if you're not at that level yet where you don't know your tonic and dominant across the fretboard, again, think back to the chords, okay, that you do and turn them into individual arpeggios. So if you only know this A minor shape, okay, go up an octave, up 12 frets, and use that as your 1, and then your 5 would be E major. Just do things like that. That's what's really going to set you up for success here. Same thing goes though with picking individual notes. So use notes like the 5 towards the end of the phrase. Other arpeggios like the diminished arpeggio. Okay, all that really good stuff. So again, if you want to work more closer on that stuff with me and you're really serious about it, go ahead and shoot me a message on Instagram or just go ahead and click on the link below and you'll find out how to do all that stuff, okay? If you're just starting out, you really want to focus on those music theory concepts. What is the 1 chord in the key that I'm in? What is the 5 chord of the key that I'm in? What is the diminished chord of the key that I'm in? If you can't figure those things out really, really fast, in my opinion at least, that is something that you should really, really thrive to get. So if somebody tells you, bam, we're in the key of B flat major, what's the dominant chord? Dominant meaning 5. Oh yeah, the 5 chord is F major. Or we're in the key of C minor, what's the diminished chord? Oh yeah, the diminished chord is D, the 2nd scale degree. D diminish, okay? These are the things that a lot of guitarists are lacking that you should really try to get better at. So I hope that helped. There are more advanced stuff that we can do with this, with secondary dominant, secondary diminished chords, all that good stuff, but more on that later. So I'll see you guys in the next video.